Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2019, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I begin my remarks, let me thank my colleagues, Congresswoman Virginia Foxx and Congressman David Price, for their beautiful, moving tributes to our colleague, Walter Jones. I wasn't an intimate friend of Walter's, but we did have a friendship, and each encounter that I had with him, it was special because he always had an eye toward that which was higher and noble and good. And I heard some of your sentiments that you express, heartfelt sentiments of loss, but also of great tribute and honor to this extraordinary man who did try to rise above the difficulties and the tensions here. And I think both by his life and his death taught us invaluable lessons. And I frankly think it's what the American people are longing for from this body as well. So thank you very much for doing this. Madam Speaker, tonight I'd like to talk about two women from very different places, two women from very different cultures, different religions, two women with very different stories. Together, these two women, differently and separately, they're reinterpreting in light of what was so that they can imagine what will be. The first woman, her name is Nadia Murad. Nadia won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018, last year. I know Nadia. She is a Yazidi woman from northern Iraq. The Yazidis are a people bound by an ancient faith tradition, and they have sought to live in peace in very harsh surroundings through the centuries. Along with the Christians of the area, they have endured many persecutions for a very long time. But nothing could have prepared Nadia for what happened on August 15th in 2014. Nadia lived in a little village called Kocho in an area called Sinjar, again in northern Iraq. The town's residents were mostly farmers and shepherds. At 21 years old, Nadia dreamed of owning her own hair salon, becoming a history teacher. But then the unthinkable happened. The Islamic State, ISIS, invaded her village. ISIS rounded up everyone and forced them into the schoolyard. The men were then separated from women, and as Nadia told us, she said she never realized how small her village was until she saw all of them in that schoolyard. They stood huddled on the dry grass. Some whispered to one another, wondering what was going on. Others were silent, in shock. No one understood what was happening, as Nadia said to us. Nadia was then forced to watch as 6 of her brothers were massacred. Her mother was executed along with 80 other older women. The bodies of the men and women were then thrown into mass graves. And the rest of the women, including Nadia, were taken to Mosul, the largest city held by ISIS at that time, and they were sold. They were sold as sex slaves. The depravity of ISIS further unfolded as they sought to carry out a genocide, a complete extermination of Christians and Yazidis and other religious minority traditions in that area. The Yazidis were singled out for persecution by ISIS because they were part of a Kurdish-speaking religion without a holy book. And using that background as justification, what was called the ISIS Research and Fatwa Department targeted Yazidi women for sexual slavery in an effort to lure young men into joining their cause. ISIS's twisted bureaucracy of barbarity even prepared a document on this, and it's called Questions and Answers on Taking Captives and Slaves. And true to the dictates of the ISIS document, Nadia was bought and sold several times, with Facebook used as one of the prime ISIS marketing tools. She was repeatedly raped, burned with cigarettes, and beaten, and at one point attempted to escape, was caught, and then the vicious gang rape that then pursued left her unconscious. She decided not to try to escape again. But after months of unspeakable agony, one day Nadia discovered that a door had been left unlocked, and she fled. She found refuge with a Muslim family who willingly helped her. In fact, the eldest son, at great personal risk, took her in his car and got her to the Kurdish lines, where she was safe. I was first introduced to Nadia by some friends in Lincoln's Yazidi community. Through an interesting convergence of things, Lincoln, Nebraska, which is my home, has the largest Yazidi population in America. Many of the young men had served as our translators during the height of the Iraq War, and interestingly, one of the first pieces of legislation that I worked on was to give special visas accommodating people to come to America who had risked their lives alongside of our troops, some of whom died, and they were given special status to come here. Many have made their home in Nebraska, and I'm very proud of that. When Nadia came to see me, I just could sense the trauma in her face and the wounds in her soul. So I tried to gently ask Nadia if she would be willing to share her full story with those of us there in my office. I told her I thought it was important that we do hear in order to try and understand, but only if she wanted to. But she, again, gently answered back, yes, she would share her story. She walked us through her nightmare. And at one point I looked over at her Yazidi translator. Tears streamed down his face. My own chief of staff, he sobbed. It was just too much to bear. But in a real moment of pride for me, Madam Speaker, 1 month ago today, Nadia Murad was my guest right here in the House chamber for the State of the Union. I was happy to see her again, and she gave me a copy of her book called The Last Girl. Her fiancé was with her, Abid Shamdeen. What a gentle young man. He had served as well as a translator at the height of the Iraq War and had earned his citizenship to America. Nadia and I, before the State of the Union event, we spent about an hour with a reporter from the Washington Post. And the beautiful gift of watching her interact with this reporter was this. She answered the questions clearly, with great grace and purposeful resolve. And as Abid lovingly stood by her, translated his words and her words and the full meaning of them. And though she was in Washington to raise awareness of the Yazidi genocide and join us in the call for a new type of security settlement in northern Iraq that would protect the ancient mosaic, the ancient tapestry of religious pluralism that once existed there, including Christian and Yazidis as well as certain Islamic minority traditions. While that was her primary motive, before that reporter and us, again, she gently and profoundly articulated the need to respect human dignity. And she used that pain in her soul to project healing on our broken world. Now, Madam Speaker, when I first came to Congress, an older member, he warned me about something. He called it the tyranny of the urgent. He says, be careful of the tyranny of the urgent, because what that will do is subsume you into emergency after emergency without leaving any time for reflection, for thought, for dialogue, for relationship. And we see that played out day after day, and of course the media begs this as issues switch and controversies arise, and we're all summoned to give various opinions on whatever negative thing just happened. It's the tyranny of the urgent. We've got to be careful of that, because it robs us of the chance to sit with a woman, a heroic woman like Nadia, and listen carefully to what she has to say. This hour-by-hour DC 9/11 fire alarm is distracting us from this essential work of reflection and authentic governance. And it's true now more than ever. A lot of what goes on here is outside of the glare of television. And recently I had the chance to engage the administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, who had come before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations. And I talked to him about a number of issues that were important to me, the country of Haiti, the prospects for reforestation around the world, conservation, the story of Nadia and so many Yazidis, and this need for the new security settlement in northern Iraq. The American people are generously helping with economic aid under the leadership of the Agency for International Development to help potentially create the conditions in which Yazidis and Christians could return and once again flourish. So this was foremost in my mind as I spoke with the administrator in the committee hearing. But I told the administrator this, that the name itself, the United States Agency for International Development, really does not capture the fullness of the mission of what we are trying to do. Ultimately, this mission and our disposition, as reflected in policy, ought to be about one thing expressed in two words: human dignity, protecting human dignity. And in doing so, attacking the root causes of poverty and attempting to create for the 21st century an imaginative architecture for diplomatic relations, again rooted in authentic service to America's humanitarian impulse, creating the conditions for international stability, which are inextricably intertwined with our own national security. This is a properly oriented foreign policy trajectory of our nation. And again, it's based on the idea that America's impulse is to be charitable. America's impulse is to help. Yes, to demand responsibility, but also to help create the conditions in which human life can flourish. This has profound meaning, Madam Speaker, where I live, particularly in Nebraska, because one of the ways in which we express in practical terms that humanitarian impulse is through agricultural policy. We feed ourselves and we feed the world. Nebraska has a big role in doing just that. And this is true now more than ever in our modern age. The land has been the source of our vitality in America. Particularly where I live, but really across the country, agriculture is so essential to our economic well-being, our life, our way of life, our culture, to who we are as a people. And again, where I live, production agriculture is so essential in corn and soybeans and livestock that cover much of our landscape. They are an important part of America's export prowess. The farm communities and the ranch communities' efficiency, their quality, their ingenuity allows us to provide food security for tens of millions of vulnerable people in America and abroad, while ensuring that Americans enjoy the lowest per capita grocery bills in all the world. Now, the challenge and the opportunity is to grow America's farm family. And to look to the future, we should look to the past to see, again, in this new century, a new connection starting to occur between the urban and the rural. This diversification of our farm family is happening rapidly. And so we, importantly, are no longer talking in the language of producers and consumers, but rather in terms of connecting the farmer to the family. You can now meet your farmer at the local farmer's market. That's a level of intimacy not seen since the early days of agriculture in America. And this desire, what's at stake here, Madam Speaker, is this desire to bring people closer to their food and into an authentic relationship with those who grow that food. Agriculture is creating an exciting new entrepreneurial space. And we have seen a real uptick in young people entering the ag field. Young people are being drawn to agriculture through exciting new niches, including artisanal foods and crops, organics, and the farm-to-fork movement. And agricultural studies no longer sit off on the side in their own silo. They are inextricably intertwined in intimate relationship with environmental science and conservation, as well as international development. Restaurants that focus on locally sourced foods are also growing in popularity. And with that trend comes an increased interest in the food of indigenous peoples. All exciting new spaces. Still, at the heart of Nebraska and at the heart of America is the traditional large-scale American farm. At the beginning of this, Madam Speaker, I talked about two women, and we've heard about Nadia Murad, who is living with a deep wound and yet seeking ways to rebuild what once was a thriving tradition. I want to talk about another woman I recently met though. A fascinating young woman who has merged the millennial sense of authentic connection with a traditional production ag operation. Hannah Esch is an agricultural student at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln and a Nebraska beef ambassador. Hannah was surprised when she recently visited some young children in a classroom in one of our counties, and when asked a basic question about where food comes from, a third grader answered that eggs come from cows since they are next to the milk in the grocery store. This alarmed Hannah a bit, but it reinforced Hannah's desire to go deeper into ag education and outreach. Hannah is a specialty livestock producer with a fascinating background as an agricultural pioneer. She is a part of a growing movement of young agricultural entrepreneurs. She is a passionate advocate for production agriculture while also seeking emerging niche opportunities. In Nebraska, the average age of the farmer is 58 years old. I don't know exactly what it is across the country, Madam Speaker, but I assume it's somewhat similar. What we have on our hands is, on the horizon, a generational transfer. But there is also an interesting convergence of amazing new opportunity on that same horizon. Two dynamics are on the verge of breaking out: small-scale farm production and the nimble, innovative use of technology in agriculture. I met Hannah at an Ag Pioneers event organized by the Agribusiness Entrepreneurship Program at the University of Nebraska. The businesses of these cutting-edge ag leaders range from organic popcorn production to ag tech and the Internet of Things. Others were leaders in the farm-to-table movement, boutique vegetable growers, and specialty livestock sellers. Some were large grain producers, experimenting with cover crops that would enhance the soil and also advance their own innovation in the precision agriculture space. Not everybody in this room was young. Not everybody came from farm families, interestingly. But what they shared was a passionate desire to add value to traditional production agriculture and create the space for a new food movement that is showing tremendous potential. And of course, at that meeting, given that this body recently passed a new farm bill, an important piece of legislation that does basically one thing, provides food security in two ways: the risk management policies that protect agricultural producers from the vagaries, the ups and downs of weather, the supply problems, as well as other difficulties that arise in ensuring that a timely, good harvest is delivered. That's the purpose of the Farm Bill, combined with its other purpose to help those who are in food vulnerable circumstances through our nutrition programs. And we discussed the policies embedded in the Farm Bill, including the value-added grants section and the assistance that we give to beginning farmers and ranchers. Another group of, one of the participants were the Brugger brothers. They were engaging young people who could, honestly, Madam Speaker, star in a reality TV show. They are adding enormous value to the farm commodities they produce. These twins not only distill corn and raise cattle, they create a sequence of value across multiple agricultural products, from hops to whiskey to finished meats. Their vertical integration puts the value in the value chain in their pocket. That's an exciting entrepreneurial place to be. These brothers, however, are about more than food. They also want to lure members of their younger generation back to the small town. They want to build community around artisanal agriculture. This connectivity around food is one of the value propositions that I wanted to highlight here, that Hannah holds so dear. She's grown her own premium brand of beef through the power of story. Using Instagram and photo video, Hannah sells her livestock product directly via the internet to a diverse range of customers from around the country who yearn to know the provenance of their food. Hannah draws interest in her beef by showing the life cycle of her cattle. And through compelling use of social media, she invites customers into the intimate process of livestock production. Her market, again, is to a world hungry for the authentic story behind what's for dinner. Madam Speaker, with Hannah and other ag pioneers, we are experiencing a bit, or the front end, should I say, of an emerging set of ideas that will help shape our social and economic well-being for this century. It is the entrepreneurial drive that these young people possess to be stewards of the land, to grow the ag family, and to create the space for genuine food relationship. And this millennial-driven movement signifies an embrace of the traditional human-scaled model of agriculture, for which our society is yearning, while remaining firmly within and adding to the mainstream of production agriculture that feeds America and feeds the world. So what do Hannah and Nadia hold in common? I think they're connected. They're from very different lands. They speak different languages. They have different cultural mores. What they're driving for is meaning around human dignity. Whether it's Nadia, who has suffered the horrible loss of her family and her extraordinary tradition. She's being driven by a purpose to pull out of that tragedy deep meaning and projecting that on the world, speaking to our hearts clearly through her suffering about the need for human dignity. It is our only way out to express and rebuild our systems of governance, our foreign relations, in our economics around this idea of interconnectedness with respect for human dignity. It's a very important driver, even in the life of an entrepreneur like Hannah, who seeks again the authenticity of food relationship. I think there's an intimate connection here between two women from two very different, far away places. Madam Speaker, my wife was telling me recently, and I venture out here a little bit because I don't know the name of this art form. It's my understanding there's a type of porcelain that is very, very delicate and fragile. And if it should break, it's actually repaired by gold. So that as beautiful as the original piece was, it becomes more vibrant, more offering. Its brokenness shows more beauty. And listening to Nadia and her deep woundedness, and watching her young fiancé lovingly escort her through this storytelling of her wounds to the world. It's that porcelain being repaired by gold, and it shines all the more beautifully. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman has yielded his time. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares that the House is in recess subject to the call of the clerk, the call of the Chair.